don't look past the simple things. Hospitality is not a complicated formula. It's about delivering experience, good service, and making people feel welcome.
Welcome to another episode of the Radical Hospitality Podcast. I'm your host, Zeke Freeman. Super excited today. On the show, we're joined by someone whose work has really shaped some of the most iconic destinations in the world. Scott Lamont is the CEO of EDSA, a global landscape architecture, master planning, and design firm known for creating extraordinary places for brands like Four Seasons, St. Regis, Ritz-Carlton, Disney, Marriott, and many more. Over his 25 years, Scott has led teams across continents from the Caribbean to South America to the Middle East and Asia. He's always championing a philosophy that best ideas begin with the place. His approach centers on curiosity, humility, and collaboration, and he believes deeply in the emotional and cultural power of landscape to spark creativity, shape human connection, and give destinations their soul. Scott brings a rare perspective at the intersection of design, hospitality, and human experience. And I'm excited to dive in what really means to design within a place, not just in it. Scott, welcome to the Radical Hospitality Show.
Thank you, Zeke. It's a pleasure to be here. That's one heck of an intro, but love to get into the conversation and talk about all those great things.
Very excited. Well, first of all, EDSA, you guys do some amazing work and projects across the world. Can you give me, let's start with Scott as a person and your role and involvement bringing up EDSA and kind of your background.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, this was my first job out of college. I started here when I was literally, fresh off, university studies from the University of Florida, moved down to Fort Lauderdale for what I thought would be a very short stint at EDSA, which was even a well-known firm at that time. And it really just resonated with me, and the opportunities to travel to many of the places that you've described and the experiences that we've gained has really been what's kept me engaged in this profession for so many years. And it's been fun, coming through the business, starting as a designer here within the firm, and then now in the role that I serve currently. It's given me a lot of perspective on the work that we do and the places that we work. And so, we feel very fortunate to have collaborated with some of the brands and flags that you've mentioned, but also a lot of great creative people around the world, and touched a lot of amazing cultures. So it's been an incredible journey. It doesn't really feel like work, but at the end of the day, we love what we do. So.
I discovered hospitality is like the secret sauce in design work, because you get to go to all these amazing places, and I'm really excited to learn about some of the different places you guys are in and how you guys got there. Could you maybe give, just before we get into that, just a little overview of EDSA? What do they do?
Well, as you indicated, we are planners and landscape architects. And, while we have a very robust hospitality practice, and we've been engaged in hospitality on a global stage, working literally in every market in the world, but we also do a lot of urban design work. Which is, spreads into hospitality as well, right? With urban hotels that we work on, but community planning, healthcare. So really, it's a very diverse portfolio of work. But what's interesting about our firm is, because of our experience in hospitality, we've always sort of looked through that lens. And, whether we're working in the themed entertainment space, or we're working in, an urban design, true downtown experience space, we're looking through that guest experience lens. So it's allowed us to, I think, bring a little bit of a different angle to the work that we do. And the firm has grown over the years, and our practices continue to grow, through great partnerships with clients. And the firm, other thing I'll add too, is the fact that we do work globally is not necessarily a new phenomenon for the firm. When we were founded in 1960, our founder was the son of a very prolific architect, Edward Durrell Stone. And his father had a global practice back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. So when we started the firm, or when Ed Stone Jr., that's the EDS and EDSA, founded the firm, he really looked at it as a global business from the very beginning. So that's the way we were all kind of raised in the design firm. And, the sense of collaboration and appreciation for the global culture has been instilled in all of us from the day we walked in the door.
So I'd love to just kind of understand, y'all's design process a little bit. You know, what are some of the things that, as you are starting to work through a beginning process of laying out a resort, that you guys look for, and how does your process work?
Well, place really matters to us. And, being landscape architects, we're continuously looking back to the sites that we work in, the communities that we work in, the cultures within those communities, and we use that as a source of inspiration. And having traveled a significant amount and worked in a lot of different places, we've learned how to be students of place, right? And going into these different environments and learning what we can. And I probably use this line too often, but it's really something I believe in, and is not necessarily taking the guided tour when you're in some of these new destinations to really find the true core and essence. The client may want you to see it this way, but you may say, well, let's go over here and see what these guys are doing. That's an important part of the beginning of our process, is trying to truly understand the place that we're working in, the people, the land, and the culture. The other piece that is important to us as kind of an ethos is teamwork, and recognizing that there are so many talented folks in there, out there, from the design side, the engineering side, operation side, knowing that these great destinations are not any one person's visions. It's all something that we come up with together and leverage each other's strengths on the projects. And that applies in our own studios out here when we're working around the table. It is not a top down led design organization. If anything, it's more bottom up, really, from the studio, and just gaining ideas from everybody around the table. That's important to who we are, because especially when you're working in high profile projects, or you're working in, I'll say, real competitive marketplaces, you really want to have that collaborative spirit, because it's just more fun. When you're partnered with a friend. I mean, some of my best friends in the business are my best friends in the real world, because we enjoy working together. We've traveled around the world together, and those are the kind of projects and clients that we like to work with. We just thrive on that. And again, we feel very blessed to have that history and relationship with our team. And the vast majority of our business, well over 70% of it, is from those relationships and those repeat clients and friends, because we just enjoy what we do working together.
What does your team look like that you guys are working with? I know you mentioned you have multiple offices, but
Yes. So the way we're structured is, we work regionally, right? We have teams that look at different parts of the global marketplace. So Latin America team, a Middle East, North Africa team, Southeast Caribbean team, Mountain West, US Northeast, Asia Pacific. Then we have a specialty team that focuses on entertainment, because that's such a unique aspect of the business. You mentioned Disney in the intro there. Those type of clients give us the opportunity to work on those projects. So that's been something that we felt is really important, to leverage the experience of the knowledge of the regions that we work in. But even in our own house here, that's kind of a rough guideline, because, as I mentioned, those relationships transcend that. And especially in, within hospitality, many of our clients, they're working in all these marketplaces too. My buddy might want to take me to Asia, or it may be MENA, and it doesn't really matter what team I'm on, because it's really the relationship that matters. And so we do cross pollinate quite a bit. And between our 8 offices that we have, 7 here in the US and 1 in Shanghai, we work pretty fluidly, and technology has created an amazing platform for that, much like what we're doing today. So it allows us really to leverage the strengths that we have and the experiences that we have within the organization, even if it's just grabbing one of our designers or one of our partners to just come in and do a quick review for an hour, because they've done something just recently very similar to what we're looking at a new design problem that we may be trying to solve, and just capturing that expertise.
when you're working in some of these different countries, what are some of the issues that you run into, and how are you guys dealing with, just understanding like local permitting, on-site issues? How do you manage that fluidly so that
It's every marketplace is different, right? And we've learned over the years, I think, having experience at a lot of these marketplaces, how to align with local partners, especially when you get into permitting and implementation, knowing who we can call on and lean on in those marketplaces to bolster and support our team and our expertise. But we also, having practiced for so long in a lot of these places. We've got deep familiarity with local codes and kind of the approaches in all of the different markets. It's kind of one of the fun things that's is interesting, when you've been doing this for, as long as I have and many of my partners have. We've had a chance to work at each of these places and learn the nuances and the differences within each marketplace. And they're very different. Working in Latin America is a completely different design flow process than, say, the Middle East. Even in the way we pursue work and the contracts and the RFPs, they're all structured very, very differently. The thinking about management of the projects are run very differently. And that's been enlightening for our team because, we can then take some of the best practices that we've learned from the different places that we work in and try to help our clients, leverage the best with the projects that they take on.
Well, let's look at this on a specific project. Before you and I were talking here, we were looking at a couple of your projects and a couple that I think would be really fun to kind of chat through specifically.
Sure.
Um, Maybe start with, I think using Naviva as an example here. Absolutely beautiful project.
Naviva is a great project to highlight. It's also, when and the page that you've even brought up, I appreciate. It's the Landscape Architecture Foundation's Design Performance Series, which we partnered with academia to develop the performance metrics around this project as it was being developed and when it was completed. So that's an important component to this because this project was all about the site and really understanding, how to create a very bespoke and unique resort destination that is truly of the place. Right. This is not a big hotel; it's a boutique at the highest level. I believe it's 15 keys, maybe tops. And each of these bungalows and these villas were hand selected and located with bespoke view corridors, careful selection of what trees would be impacted by grading and development to really get the best out of the region so that you could truly feel, that you're really connecting, with the destination. And this is Punta Mita, Mexico, which interestingly enough, the Punta Mita development in itself in that region was a master plan that EDSA had also worked on, many years before. So we've had the opportunity to look at this destination from a macro level all the way down to the micro level of experience. And this is a project that we're very proud of. I know the Four Seasons is very proud of it. It's done very well in the last, I guess year and a half, 2 years that it's really been in operation.
Do you see this as more of a trend going to the micro resort kind of individual stays versus the larger, what you would think of Four Season hotel type
Yeah.
units?
I think we do, and there's definitely been the term that everyone likes to use out there is that flight to quality. But even at this level, I think what we've learned is that in the higher end or ultra level of hospitality, there is a strong demand for this experience that people are seeking, and you can deliver that on this type of a scale in a different way than you can at, say, a larger resort or a mega resort. And people are willing to spend that little bit of extra money that it would take to be a part of a destination like this. And then on top of that, the experiences that you might have that is led by the operators and the management team that extend the site beyond just the boundaries of the development, but looking at the regional area, and that might be a culinary experience, and in the greater town that might be connecting into the mountain trails that leads you down to these hidden beaches and little rock outcroppings that are really truly unique. And I think guests are more and more willing to get out of their comfort zone in those experiences and quite frankly pay for those experiences. There seems to be a large trend shifting in that direction, and the demographics and the financial support that. We see that as the baby boomers are retiring, there's more wealth that's being transferred into the pockets of folks that are willing to spend their disposable income on making sure they get to be a part of that experience. And so we do see this happening in key markets, around the world where, you would think, to be a successful hotel model, the rule of thumb in the old days was like, oh, well, you got to be about to be a really good boutique hotel. You got to be about 99 keys or 85 keys. And, now I think it's been proven that, you can do it on a much, much smaller footprint if you're delivering that experience and you're delivering that level of service that the guest at this level expects.
So, like, walk me through coming back to that idea of like the design process on this. You mentioned you guys have been involved with some of the master planning. I assume when this started, it was kind of, beautiful beachfront raw land. Did
That's
they
right.
come to you guys with a program? Did you guys, come up with what it should be?
I
What
mean,
did that look like from like day one when you're laying out those first couple lines and sketches?
yeah, there's definitely business goals and strong programming that comes from the ownership team that says this is what we're trying to create, and many times we're partnering with them to help realize that vision. And on a site like this, it's kind of both very creative on one end, but it's also very analytical on the other, where we are able to leverage the technology that we have within the organization to analyze site data, and model site data at a completely different level than maybe was possible even 10 years ago, to where we can really truly understand the highest and really best opportunities that we have on the site, without creating a high level of disturbance, to maintain kind of the integrity of the overall destination. And so that's all very analytical. But at the end of the day, and this project's a great example of it, and our team that worked on it literally sits right outside my office, could tell you the stories about, having things staked in the field and then going out there and making those very much of the moment adjustments to say, okay, well, maybe we don't need that one key, because if we spread this one over here and can't this view another 20 degrees this way, we're going to truly get that wow moment versus what we may have thought on paper or even in a computer model of where we thought it needed to be. So it's the two really work hand in hand, and working with great operators and great owners, they understand that that's a collaborative process. That's a back and forth, and many times it starts with fat markers and trace drawings, over, analytical topography and slope analysis and watershed analysis and all the things that come into mind when you're working on steep slopes like this. But it doesn't replace being out on the property and feeling it and experiencing it firsthand.
And then you guys handle that, like would start with like the overall master plan. Are you also doing the architecture on the piece? Or are you working with a local architect or?
Many times where we're partnered with architects and local architects, and sometimes there may be a design architect that will be partnered with a local architect. This project is really unique because a lot of the materials and the sourcing of the products, were all intentionally brought from a very small network and a local network to really, again, lean into that sense of place and authenticity of the region. That's really important. But we don't necessarily develop architecture here at EDSA. We're all about finding those right design partners and coordinating with them, to find success. And again, that gets back to the whole team aspect of these projects and the push and pull, because we may work with a design partner who might see something a little bit differently than we do. you know More of the mentality is like, well, we want to hear that. Let's explore that idea, together and work through it. So like any good master plan, it's just a starting point.
Yeah.
And good master plans are meant to evolve, and it's an important part of the process. And there's no pride in saying, oh, we nailed it at the master plan. The master plan is just the step to get us to the development of the property itself, where we really want to see what can be successful on the site.
I love when good architecture, flows into the landscape and the landscape flows into the architecture. And I feel like that's missed often. One of the things, in Colorado we love to do is, walk out on the site and look for where are the really capturing views that we would like to frame at the end of a project. And that might show up, in a long axis that comes across the whole site, from your entry sequence, but it might end up in a, a tiny window in a bathroom where it frames
Right.
in, this amazing view. And so when those things work together well, like it's really successful.
Yeah, I mean, two things to comment on there, and you touched on. I love the reference of the small window because we do think of it, as if we're choreographing an experience, right? And what that even from the arrival moment, what you're seeing as you're moving through the site, and those key points, particularly on terrain where you might be taking a turn. What is that vista? And how does that vista contribute to the greater story of the destination? Do we capture that view where all of a sudden you see a peak of the ocean or you see a peak of the beach, and then it heightens your sense of anticipation and desire to explore,
Mm.
which is it's really important to us. And again, as I mentioned in other markets that we work in, whether it be an urban market, we think about these same things, especially, and I've talked about this extensively because it's something I believe pretty strongly in, especially in those arrival moments, because I think they're so critically important to framing a guest's understanding and opinion and really starting the whole entire guest experience of a resort destination is so critically important. And then the other thing that comes to mind in hearing your reference is the blurring of the lines between the indoor and the outdoor spaces. That is something that we've always believed has been important, but in the last, I'd say 5 to 7 years, it's become even more so. And with biophilia being recognized as an important part of wellness and being brought into the developments in such a much more significant way, it's really blurred those lines. And I look at some of the projects that we're doing right now, like in the Red Sea, and in the Middle East, where we're really being very, very intentional with how we create these shaded courtyards and focusing on microclimates, and in aggressive climates like that, and how we can bring landscape into the indoor outdoors. That puts us in such a unique place to work hand in hand with our architectural partners to where we're creating something that is truly, a shared vision.
Yeah, you mentioned biophilia, and we've got this image up of this arrival bridge, and my first interpretation of it, oh, this is probably it feels like one of the Beatles or something that'd be crawling around on the site, and then you also can't quite tell where the landscape starts and ends. Kind of that, the bridge is kind of coming out. There's definitely an architectural component, but then it blends right into the landscape. Where in this process, I don't know if you're involved in this particular piece, do you guys kind of start and stop, and how do uh, like allow that crossover with your
Yeah.
architectural partners to happen?
It's very intentional, as I think the short answer to the question is. And the partners that we work with, I think, understand what we're trying to achieve, that we understand what they're trying to achieve, and we work really closely to develop those kind of seamless boundaries. Because if you visit a property and you could see a clean line of demarcation where designer A was on one side of the fence and designer B was on the other side of the fence, that's a miss, right? That's a missed opportunity. So we look for, those moments where we do get to blur those lines a little bit. And that's, that gets back to the whole collaborative nature of it. And I always think back, I was doing a project probably maybe 6 or 7 years ago. We were down in Aruba, of all places, and we were working with an architect who's a good buddy of mine. And the owner at one point during the design charrette, which is another tool which I could touch on a little bit because they're so much fun. He actually stopped the presentation for a minute and he's like, "Hold on, I'm confused. I thought you were the landscape architect and you were the architect, but you're not talking about your respective disciplines." And we were like, both of us were like, "Oh, that's a great compliment. Fantastic, right? If that's the way you see it, then we've succeeded." Because we're both, trying to convey the different ideas, and to a point where even our owner, who had hired both of us, didn't really even realize what he was getting, but he knew he liked it. He just didn't know who was who, and that was kind of a fun moment.
And I'll be honest, a lot of times, we'll go through, we'll design a building, we'll have some ideas about the landscape, and then we hand it over to the landscape architect. And I'm really trying to push and encourage our team to bring everybody in earlier, I imagine you guys have a little bit of hand up because you're starting with the overall planning, bringing in an architect, and then maybe finishing up some of the landscape design.
It runs both ways. We've been brought into projects first many times because clients will come to us because they know that we have that master planning background and kind of holistic vision of the site. But it also works the other way where, we get a lot of calls from our partners that say, hey, we know what we're trying to accomplish here, and we know we need you guys to be part of our team to help us do it together. It's an incredible group. I mean, and working with folks like Luxury Frontiers on this project, I mean, those type of folks understand, how we do this stuff together. And I look at some of the work that we're doing in the Middle East with Foster and Partners. Our teams have really, have gelled really well to understand the push and pull on how we can get the best out of the project together. And again, that's where great friendships form, and that really leads to great design outcomes.
Well, feel free to push me if you want me to pull up any of these Mr. Middle East projects a couple of times, and we can grab one of those and take a look. Get some things that would be helpful to run through on those.
Yeah, I mean and there's a variety of them to talk to at a lot of different scales. I mean, one project that we're excited about right now that is coming out of the ground, and, is what we're seeing is the Win Marjan is the first integrated gaming casino in the Middle East, that is coming online. Um, you're looking at our website. I'm not sure that if it's quite up on the website right now, but working
Okay.
with design partners like HKS and great clients like Marjan, and of course the fabulous team at Win. It is, it's really a great example of how we've been able to do that. Another good example when we're talking about the boutique style that we're working in is a new project that we just opened this year, actually, Nekajui. Still not 100% sure I'm saying that right. It's in Papagayo, in the Peninsula Papagayo in Costa Rica. A project that we did with 10 Design, and it's a rich reserve project, which is another kind of higher end, bespoke, kind of more boutique experience. Also on a site with difficult terrain where we have to spend a lot of time, understanding the dynamics of how it's developed. So those are fun examples, at completely different scales, right? Versus more of a large, integrated gaming resort versus one that is more about, these found moments. And these are great images of some of the pools that overlook. Papagayo is also another master plan that EDSA did, probably I would say in the late '90s. And we've done a number of different hotels within that development, and we're continuing to work there today on the marina and on a lot of the public realm that's happening. My claim to fame on this project here is I actually got kicked off the construction site, which was kind of fun. We were down there for another client, and I was literally just about 30 minutes away, and I wanted to just see what was happening. And it was a Sunday, so there wasn't a lot happening. So we took the rental car and just kind of made our way out there, and just with a confident wave and a hard hat and a clipboard, just kind of walked by the security guys and walked in and walked around for about maybe 10 minutes, and until somebody realized that we were not supposed to be there, and kindly escorted us off the site without us ever claiming who we were or what we were doing. But it was a fun day to see the property in progress. So this too has been really successful, and working with great partners, such as GenCom, who developed this. Just great properties and teams that we get to work with.
I have a good friend, Roderick Anderson, that's Sarco Architects down in Costa Rica. And our little mastermind group was down in Costa Rica at the Ritz Carlton this year. I think there's a whole site as part of this, and that he's done some single families on that are just, yeah, neat. I have a heart for Costa Rica. I think it's a beautiful place, and it kind of lends itself to, if you're going to touch it, you need to be careful with what you're touching, because it's hard to make something that's already so beautiful better. I don't know if that's possible, but you have the opportunity because you have these amazing uh, ocean views and beautiful surf and rainforest to come into. So I think being careful in those spaces, but it certainly opens up whatever you touch to uh, create something that's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, bring your hiking boots. I can tell you the first time I visited, I was actually covering a meeting for one of my partners, and we went out on like a 6 or 7 hour site visit to look at. We're working on another master plan called Cacique, which is actually just around the corner from
Okay.
Papagayo. And I had no idea what I was getting into, even though I had been warned on the amount of hiking that we were going to do. And then, by the end of the day, you look at your iPhone to see like, well, how many steps did I take? I climbed 71 flights of stairs in about 5 hours, and
Nice.
I think I was sore for 2 weeks. But our client, who clearly did this a lot, wasn't even phased. But our team was. We were dying on the hillside, but I'll tell you, at the end of the day, when we made it to the final kind of Vistage point that we went to as the sun was setting, and they had brought up some drinks for us, and it was just like, okay, that was the best day ever. Even though I probably lost 10 pounds of sweat and, and definitely needed to throw the clothes I had with me in the garbage before they went back in my suitcase.
Love it. Yeah, a lot of these, these sites they look, pristine and pretty when you're done, but they start out as pretty rough, rugged landscapes to actually
Yeah.
get in and lay something
That
out.
It's true. And, we laugh about those stories. I mean, years ago, I was working in southwestern China in a place called Xishuangbanna, which is kind of a blend of where Thailand and China border. And there's that influence of both of those cultures to where even our clients who were from Beijing didn't speak the local dialect. So that we were all working through translators. And it was like three different versions before it could make it to English, and it was such a unique experience. But we spent about 4 days in the rainforest, and literally every day I came back to the hotel and I was like, well, these clothes are never going to get worn again. So I came home with an empty suitcase. But those type of experiences, and that project in particular was always a fun one for me. It was more of a tourism master plan. We were helping the client and as by extension the local government determine what sites should be developed for tourism, to generate revenue for the region, but also what should be preserved. And of this, and it's been a few years, so I'm going to call it a 3,000 hectare site. We think we preserved like 90% of it, or if 95% of it, and kept a couple of little spots where they might do projects like these. That's really one with the site. And when you look at those photos, and I'll be sure to get our team to send you a couple of those photos when we're carrying banana leaves as rain umbrellas, walking through your site for hours on end. Those are definitely memories that forge good bonds between clients and team
Yeah,
members
love it.
when you're going through those treks together. But that's
I'm reading through Von Chenard's latest book right now, Dirtbag Billionaire. He's the founder of Patagonia, and one of the themes that he struggles with through the book is this. They have this strong ethos of preservation, and their whole company motto is really about exist to save the planet that we're living on. And then but he openly acknowledges that he's building a company that's also using resources. And as a landscape designer, you're going into places that are beautiful, you're preserved, you're creating spaces that people can go into and appreciate and use. Yet at the same time, I'm certain that and I see on some of y'all's ethos, talk about these same things about you're talking about preserving, creating those spaces that should be preserved. How do you balance that with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it is a balance. And that project is probably one of the ones that stands out the most for me, because, when we looked, again, doing that analytical study before of topography and really understanding, the true construction viability in steep topography and in an environment like that, we were like, okay, well, on paper, these are the 7 or 8 most likely candidates for development. And then when we got there and we saw these beautiful villages, that had been there for 1,000 years or however long, that we were just like, there is no way in that we should ever be doing anything near this, because this is what makes this place. And so, convincing our client that it was going to be way harder to build or develop in a different area, but if he took away this experience, then this entire destination would not be what it is. And that was really kind of a strong ethos we felt about the project and about the site. And candidly, it was one of the biggest victories, because at the end of the day, the result, our deliverable, was actually a zoning plan that talked about what was to be preserved and what was to be, available for development. And we were able to win those arguments. And that's really rewarding, because you often, particularly in emerging markets, you're going into sites where there's been some previous occupation of the property, and you just have to really understand how to balance that. And that's something that we take very seriously here, because, again, we also have the benefit of seeing things through that different lens. Some of our clients may look at something and say, oh, well, that's an eyesore. We don't really need that anymore. Or that really degrades, the beauty of the site. And we say, no, no, that's actually something that I've never seen before. And that's really unique to this place. Let's let that be something we embrace and let's lean into. And like, oh, well, that's just this little market, and no one wants to go there, it's dirty, it's this, it's that. And we said, well, maybe we invest a little bit in that community and maybe make that part of the narrative and part of that story, even though it's off our site, so that a guest might be able to go out and find that experience and have the lunch that, that they think that we're not going to enjoy because it's just local, local, local. And we're like, man, this is the coolest thing ever. I never thought I would be eating this kind of food in the hillsides. And, that's the memory that I take away. And I've traveled the world, right? And so those are the kind of things that we try to have those conversations with our clients. And our more sophisticated clients, they lean into it too. They get into it and appreciate it. And it's fun. It's fun to walk that one over. But that one in particularly was a lot of fun, because when they fly in, the design teams and everybody's there, the kickoff meeting, there's probably like 30 people marching around the property. Day two, I think we had like 15. Day three, I think we had like 7. And by the time we got to the last day, it was literally like our team, the 3 of us from EDSA, and then the one client who really was committed to the project, and it was just 4 people, because we just wore everybody else out. And that was, those are those great moments and fun stories that we get to tell from those travels. And you just learn so much. You just learn so much from those experiences.
And what are you looking for when, if you get a limited time, you're going out to a site, how do you make the most out of your time? Like, what's your process? Are you
Yeah.
photographing? Are you
Well,
putting stakes in? Are you doing
yeah.
sketching?
Well, it's a great question, because we do oftentimes have a very limited window that we could truly spend on a property. Preparation, preparation, preparation. So, we were able to leverage so much data and modeling that we can do before we even get to a property, that will tell us, from an analytical point of view, a tremendous amount about the geography of the site, the topography of the site, the vegetation, hydrology. I mean, all of these things can be, desktop analyzed, right? So that when we get to a place, we can have a very clear roadmap of what we want to see and how we want to try to make the most out of that day. And, this is also an opportunity for us to work with local partners. Local engineers are oftentimes our best friends in these marketplaces, where we may say to the client, especially if you're in a greenfield site with a lot of topo like Costa Rica, or in Punta Mita, where when you're in the jungle, so to speak, and you're on a hillside, you could be anywhere. It's really hard to follow a map and know where you are. And so having surveyors come out in advance and do some wayfinding points for us that we can then true up to our digital maps and tracks that we're tracking on geolocated apps on our phones, drone flights, and being able to marry kind of that technology with traipsing through the woods really helps us. And I haven't done one yet where we haven't found something that is meaningfully changed our what we thought we were going to see to what we actually saw in the site. We did a site visit for a client down in Jamaica right after COVID. It was actually one of the first trips. It might have been the first international trip I took post COVID, where we went to a property on just an absolute gorgeous site in Jamaica. But what we didn't realize on paper was that there was a shipping lane, truck shipping lane up the valley, many miles up the valley. But because of the way the sound echoed through the valley and the way the trucks, would downshift as they were coming down the steeper slopes, it boomed across the site. And where we thought would be, the grand lobby or the wow moment, arrival was at the top of this little bit of a hill. But I mean, it was like you could literally hear every vehicle that went by, even though they were probably a mile away as the crow flew. But when we went down the slope, 10 meters to that next plateau, it's completely gone. And, that's not the kind of thing you would see by looking at a map or by looking at an aerial. You had to be there to experience it, and so, we try to leverage those moments and, coming in with good prepared ideas and then truthing them on the property. And then the second piece of that too is in implementation. As I said before, the master plan only gets you part of the way there. And so then as the master plan begins to evolve, the programs become refined, we're much more further down the line and we start to get out there and stake and site the buildings. And then going back to the project we looked at the beginning with Naviva, that's when you come out and you do that last moment choreography and say, okay, twist this villa here. This one doesn't belong here. We thought we could fit another one, but now we need to move that and bring it, to a different part of the site. So it's really trying to maximize that. And we always try to advocate for multiple visits. There's just so much to see in short periods of time that we're there. But it's such a critical, important part of the process.
So, we started in a lot of projects that are early and on this feasibility. We have clients that come to us and, they've got a piece of property under contract. They think it's going to be the, greatest resort. We dive into it and oftentimes there's a wetlands or, they can't get water rights to it or, you know, there's a neighborhood association that's dead set
Yeah,
on not letting this
sure,
happen and through.
sure.
I would imagine, a project like the one we're looking at here, or probably many of your projects, like, this is a long process of taking through the master plan. How are you assuring that, your clients' investments are making it through? What are some, especially in a foreign country,
Mhm.
you may or may not know the politics. Like, what does that look like? Maybe specifically for this project, or in general for others.
Well, in every location is different. Here in the U.S., there's probably a bit more thought is around community engagement, right? And trying to understand, especially when you mentioned those groups that may want to oppose development in an area, to really come in and try to, explain, what we're really trying to accomplish, because they always fear the worst. And when we're able to demonstrate what it is that we're truly trying to do and get that buy-in and how it can enhance that local community and can have a positive impact, and win the community over, so to speak, that's a big victory, and it help our clients sort of pave the way. Working in some of these other areas, in different regions, we really rely on, our local partners and our clients in the region to really understand the nuances around more of the political aspect of how these properties are developed. Because our approach for the site and the land is pretty consistent as we go into these projects. And so it's trying to marry that level of important dialogue into the design process. Because many times too, we hear that they want many of the same things that we're trying to achieve. Well, they don't want to see a large impact on the land. They don't want to look at this, from across the water and see a scarred landscape. Well, neither do we, right? So we have the same goal there. And by talking about it and communicating about it, we can assuage some of those concerns. And then, a lot of it too is just education, and we get it. I mean, we've done some projects here, even in our backyard in Fort Lauderdale, where they're very controversial because of the scale or size of where they might be on a property. And then at the end of the day, once we've gone through that process, people really begin to see what we're trying to create and the benefits that the project can bring. And 9 times out of 10, the outcomes are usually something that everybody loves. And so, but it is challenging, and it can be entertaining too. As I'm thinking of this, I'm remembering many years ago, and I won't name the project, to not to offend anybody, but we were doing a resort development. I'll just say in Palm Beach, just to put it in air quotes. And it was a beachfront hotel, and the community was all up in arms about the architecture, and we couldn't really quite figure out like what they were driving at, because we thought it fit really well with what we were trying to do. And we had these beautiful 3D renderings up that showed the whole beachfront. And the lady spoke at the community hearing, and she's raving on the building and pointing to it and talking about how ugly it was. And then someone, and I think it was our land use attorney, that actually said, well, ma'am, I'm sorry, that's actually not our project, that's actually your building. um, so we're actually the building over here, we just used your building for context. And then they took the air out of the room, and anyone else want to speak against the project, and all the hands go down. It's those kind of moments are few and far between, but they are memorable.
That's funny. What are the projects? Are you guys doing much in the States? Like, what are the types of projects that are right for you guys? Size, location, relationship.
Sure.
What do you look? What do you guys look for when you take on a project,
Well,
and where?
it's interesting. We get the question about size a lot, and especially in the hospitality space, people say, "Well, that this is too small of a project for you," and that's never really true in our mind, because those type of projects, we enjoy what we do, and we learn from those smaller assignments and those smaller opportunities, particularly in the repositioning world, which we've seen so much more of in the US for a variety of reasons. I mean, we could talk about the economic side of it, where it's much easier to finance a project that has reoccurring revenue that's already moving through, that's proven, and there's a real clear guidance of, well, we can lift the ADR to this if we can invest that, and there's a very clear roadmap, right? Versus a ground up build, which might be more difficult to finance in the past several years. So we've been seeing a lot more of that repositioning work, and we've loved those projects because we get to come in and look at them with new eyes and say, well, you've been doing it this way for a really, really long time, and your valet vendor has become your most important person at your front door of your hotel, and that's kind of missing the point of hospitality. So let's rethink that little experience here and make a couple of small little changes, that really have a profound impact on guest experience. And it isn't about spending the big money or really spending the capital that you would think you would have to invest to make those kind of changes. Sometimes it's just good thought. And good design doesn't have to be expensive. And so those type of projects from a scale really still appeal to us. And I think here in the US too, the projects that we get most excited about is where place matters. We're not the landscape architect that likes to come in and just shrub it up in the end. We're not adding any value at that stage. There's a million great landscape architects that can go out there and do that work. We're looking for the projects where we know that we can deliver expertise and value that's going to have an impact on the overall vision. working with a client on a confidential project that I won't call out, but recently, and he's a friend of mine, he said it the best. He's like, we're worried about the 20 feet below the buildings. This was an urban design project. And he's like, and that's where EDSA can truly deliver a lot of value because we're creating a place. And whether that building's 14 stories and it's office or it's 12 stories and it's a mix of office and condo, probably doesn't change what we want to try to accomplish in this public realm in the ground place. And so, like, let's get that right first, and then we'll build a development program from that. Whenever we can contribute to those kind of conversations, it's an amazing opportunity. And most recently, probably I guess maybe a year ago now, we were involved in the what became a failed project, but it was the Tampa Bay Rays new home that they were designing in St. Pete, and partnering with Hines, with the Tampa Bay Rays, who were amazing. Gensler, Kimley Horn, EDSA, just a great team. Populous, who was doing the baseball or the ballpark, as they call it. It was such a great conversation about the place that we were trying to create. All of these components were really critical to it, but that ground plane experience is what most fans are going to see. It's what most day to day guests and residences are going to be a part of, and where we can engage and collaborate in those environments where we're talking about those dynamics. That's where EDSA can truly contribute to the conversation in a meaningful way, because it is a conversation. When you're working with great firms like all of those, again, that's all of us around the table rolling up our sleeves and brainstorming and sharing good ideas from the owner all the way down.
Love it. Um, for hospitality developers, looking to get in and develop or build, their micro resort or something like this. What advice do you have for them right now in this market and starting projects? What would you tell an inspiring developer that's looking to do something like this?
I mean, my first advice would be to be yourself, right? And really lean into the place that you're working in, and not try to emulate that, case study that you might have seen or something that has been successful in that another marketplace. I mean, certainly, benchmarking is important, and there's so many lessons to be learned about what's worked well and what hasn't worked well. So, I mean, I'm not by any means stressing not to pay attention, that you need to do your homework, but you need to figure out what those successes were and how they could be, applicable and would resonate on your particular project and your site. Don't look past the simple things. Hospitality is not a complicated formula. It's about delivering experience, good service, and making people feel welcome. And if you can do those things, guests forgive a lot, and it may not be, the $25,000 couch you may have want to put in the lobby. You may have had to make a different business decision around that. But guests can look past that when they're really having a great time and they feel like they're at home and they feel like they're welcome. Hospitality at the end of the day, is about really evoking that emotion and welcoming people in. And so staying true to that, is probably the most important part of it. It sounds super simple because it is. And particularly too, when you're taking on, and we see this in micro hotels or boutique resorts in the urban environment where they're working within existing infrastructure, right? And lean into that, and maybe that thing that you might think, oh, well, that's really obtrusive to the lobby. Like, well, maybe there's a way to make that part of the story and the narrative and figure out how to make that a win and not necessarily, something that, is a negative to the project. And, so it's all about perspective and delivering on that promise.
I love it. Such great advice. Scott, really appreciate your time. It's a pleasure to get to know you, see some of your work. If anybody wants to get in touch with you or EDSA, what's the best way for them to connect up?
Yeah. Well, certainly, feel free to reach out to me. I mean, my contacts on the website. Our website is a great portal to reach out to our team, EDSAplan.com. Follow us on social media and message us, and just pick up the phone. My cell phone number is on every email I'll ever send, and that's for a reason. We want to hear from our friends and from future opportunities.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks, Scott. And that's a wrap.